Have you ever stopped to think that something seemingly simple, like donating an old piece of clothing, could be linked to your luck, your path, and even your prosperity? It seems like an exaggeration, almost superstition. But ancient Jewish teachings warn that personal objects hold much more than we imagine. And when we speak of clothes, we are talking about something that has been clinging to your body, to your energy, and to your history. According to deep secrets of the Jewish tradition, clothing is not just fabric. It absorbs moments, emotions, phases of life, good and bad. And when you get rid of it in just any way without awareness, you might be transferring something you shouldn't. Perhaps you have never connected the dots, but have you noticed how some people seem to lose the flow of life after certain seemingly harmless gestures? In this video, you will understand why donating used clothes can be spiritually dangerous, what Jewish wisdom teaches about luck, protection, and energy, and how small daily attitudes can silently influence your destiny. Even if you have never heard of these teachings, there is something here that might explain experiences you have already lived, without realizing it. And before continuing, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the little bell so you don't lose content like this. Now I want to see you participate. Write in the comments a catchphrase to attract luck. Something like, "My energy remains with me," or "Luck walks by my side." This helps the video reach more people. And who knows, maybe activate something positive for you too. The first truth that the Jewish tradition reveals is something almost no one takes seriously nowadays. Clothes are not just objects. They accompany you in your ordinary days, but also in the most striking moments of life. When you win, when you suffer, when you cry, when you celebrate. Every time you wear a piece of clothing, it is in direct contact with your body and your emotional field. For Jewish wisdom, this creates an invisible, yet real, connection between the person and what they wear. That is why clothes are not seen as neutral things that can be passed on without any consequence. Few people realize, but clothes absorb internal states. A period of financial difficulty, a phase of sadness, a great victory, an important change. All of this stays imprinted in some way. Kabbalah teaches that repeatedly used objects become vessels of energy. And when we talk about clothes, we are talking about something that touches the skin, follows the body's rhythm, and participates in your routine. It is no wonder that, in many ancient traditions, clothes were treated with respect, care, and even specific rituals for disposal or renewal. Now think calmly. If energy is not lost, only circulates, what happens when you give used clothing to someone without intention, without preparation, and without awareness? According to Jewish teachings, you are not just getting rid of fabric, but allowing what accompanied you, inclusive your luck, to follow another path. This does not mean that helping is wrong, but that the way you help matters. Donating without understanding can open energetic breaches that many people only notice when things start going wrong. This is where many get confused and think this is fear or superstition. But Jewish wisdom does not speak of punishment. It speaks of consequence. Just as words have weight and thoughts shape reality, seemingly simple gestures also influence the flow of life. When someone feels they have lost their rhythm, that things have stalled, or that luck has simply turned, they rarely go back to analyze small attitudes from the past. Kabbalah teaches that luck is sensitive, and that small oversights can generate big imbalances. Maybe you have never connected these points before. Maybe you have donated clothes thinking you were just doing good, and that doesn't make you wrong. But the question that remains is, what if this knowledge existed for thousands of years precisely to avoid invisible losses? And what if protecting your own luck isn't selfishness, but wisdom? Keep this in mind, because in the next few moments you will understand the true spiritual reason why the Jewish tradition issues this warning, and what to do so you don't make a mistake again. The second revelation is even deeper and, for many, uncomfortable. In Jewish wisdom, luck is not something random. It is a spiritual flow that accompanies the person according to their actions, intentions, and care. Kabbalah teaches that every human being carries a kind of spiritual cloak, an invisible protection formed by merits, choices, and energy accumulated throughout life. Physical clothes, curiously, are seen as an external reflection of this internal cloak. That is why what you wear is not just appearance. It is a symbol of protection, identity, and spiritual path. Within this view, when a piece of clothing is used for a long time, it starts to be connected to the person's spiritual field. It is as if it learns your rhythm, your struggles, your moments of strength, and also of weakness. Ancient Kabbalistic texts explain that luck attaches itself to vessels, and one of the most common vessels are objects of continuous personal use. That is why certain objects bring luck to some people and seem to bring blockages to others. It is not the object itself, but the energy it carries. Now comes a point almost no one mentions. When you donate used clothing, you lose control over who will receive it and in what spiritual state that person is. Kabbalah warns that different energies do not mix without consequences. If the clothing carried protection, focus, or prosperity, that can be transferred. If it carried emotional weight, that too. And the problem is not just what goes, but what stays. By releasing something linked to your spiritual cloak, without awareness, you can weaken your own protection for a period. That is why in the Jewish tradition, there are specific guidelines on how to dispose of personal objects. Nothing is done automatically. There is a difference between discarding, transforming, purifying, or donating with the correct intention. Wisdom does not condemn generosity, but teaches that generosity without awareness can turn into loss. The modern mistake was transforming everything into a fast, mechanical gesture, without realizing that the spiritual world does not work at the same speed as the material world. Maybe now it starts to make sense why some people feel that, after certain acts, something changes, not in a dramatic way, but subtle. Money takes longer to come in. Opportunities stall. Motivation drops. Kabbalah teaches that this is not punishment. It is misalignment. And the good news is that everything that can get misaligned can also be corrected. In the next part, you will discover what the Jewish tradition recommends doing before getting rid of clothes, so as not to donate your own luck along with them. The third revelation is precisely what almost no one explains. The problem is not the clothing, it is the way you get rid of it. The Jewish tradition never taught that one should hoard or act with unhealthy attachment, but rather that everything that was intimate needs to be treated with awareness. Clothes carry spiritual memory, and therefore should not be discarded on impulse, nor donated automatically as if they were something neutral. There is a huge difference between getting rid of something and correctly closing the energetic cycle of that object. In Kabbalah, before getting rid of a piece of clothing, the person must, at the very least, disconnect it from their own identity. This can be done in a simple yet intentional way. Mentally acknowledging that that phase of life has ended, thanking for the time the clothing served, and affirming that nothing that is yours, luck, protection, or path, follows along with it. It may seem merely symbolic, but in the spiritual world, intention is a real force, and ignoring it is what generates imbalance. There are also clear guidelines that not every piece of clothing should be donated. Clothes associated with difficult periods, illnesses, deep losses, or great emotional falls, according to tradition, should not be passed on. They must be discarded permanently, as they carry a weight that does not need to circulate. On the other hand, clothes linked to good phases require even more care, as they may contain what many call mazel, personal luck. Donating this without awareness is like giving up something you took years to build. Another important point is the recipient. Kabbalah warns that donating clothes to complete strangers, without any criteria, is spiritually risky. This does not mean stopping help, but understanding that there are other forms of charity that do, not involve personal objects. The Jewish tradition has always valued helping with money, food, or direct support more, as these acts do not transfer identity or personal energy in the same way as used clothes. Maybe now you are realizing that this teaching does not speak of fear, but of spiritual responsibility. Clothing is just the easiest example to understand, but the lesson is greater. Everything that was very close to you deserves conscious closure. In the next part, you will understand why, even when doing everything right, some people still feel blockages, and how Kabbalah explains the recovery of luck when it seems to have been lost. The fourth revelation is one of the most important. According to Kabbalah, luck can weaken, but rarely is it lost forever. What many people call bad luck is, in fact, a period in which the person's spiritual flow becomes misaligned. This can happen after thoughtless decisions, words spoken on impulse, attitudes repeated without awareness, and yes, also after getting rid of personal objects in a careless way. The Jewish tradition teaches that luck moves away when the person disconnects from their own spiritual identity, but it can return when that connection is restored. Kabbalistic texts explain that luck is linked to inner clarity. When someone acts on autopilot, without intention, life begins to respond in the same way. Doors that take long to open, opportunities that slip away, tiredness without explanation. It is not punishment, it is reflection. Therefore, the first step to recover luck is to interrupt the cycle of unconsciousness. Taking awareness is, in itself, an act of spiritual realignment. It is the moment when the person stops being a passenger in their own life and goes back to being the driver. The Jewish tradition recommends simple but profound practices to restore this flow. One of them is the act of verbalizing intention, saying in a low voice, or even in thought, that you choose to keep your luck, your protection, and your path with you. Another practice is conscious gratitude, recognizing difficult phases not as failures, but as parts of the journey that strengthened your soul. Kabbalah teaches that gratitude reorganizes internal energy and creates space for luck to circulate again. Another essential point is to stop repeating the mistake. When someone understands that certain gestures have a spiritual impact, but continues acting in the same way, the misalignment is prolonged. Recovering luck requires coherence between understanding and action. This means starting to treat simple choices, like what you keep, what you discard, and how you help, with more presence. Luck, according to Jewish tradition, approaches those who act with clear intention, not those who live on impulse. Maybe you are realizing now that none of this is too mystical or distant from reality. Quite the opposite. It is deeply practical. Kabbalah simply gives spiritual language to something that many people feel, but don't know how to explain. In the next and final part, you will understand why this teaching was preserved for centuries and what it reveals about the true meaning of protection, prosperity, and spiritual responsibility in modern life. The fifth and last revelation explains why this teaching crossed centuries without disappearing. Because it does not speak only of clothes, but of spiritual responsibility. The Jewish tradition has always taught that human beings leave marks wherever they go, on people, in words, on objects. In an ancient world where everything was slower and more conscious, this was obvious. Today, in the modern rush, we forget that not everything should be treated as disposable. Clothes are just the most visible symbol of something greater. That which was close to you carries part of your history. Kabbalah teaches that protecting one's own luck is not an act of fear, but of spiritual maturity. Wise people do not live suspiciously, but attentively. They understand that prosperity, protection, and path do not arise from chance, but from alignment. When someone learns to respect cycles, including the cycle of closing things, that person begins to walk with more firmness. Nothing is left loose, nothing is left to chance, and life responds with more fluidity. This knowledge was preserved because it works in any era. It does not require complex rituals, nor rigid beliefs. It only requires awareness. Awareness when discarding, when helping, when choosing. The Jewish tradition never taught to retain out of fear, but to act with clear intention. When intention and action walk together, luck stops being something fragile and becomes something cultivated. Perhaps, hearing all this, you realize that you have already felt something similar at some point in your life. That feeling that something simple had a bigger impact than it should have. Kabbalah merely gives a name to what intuition already knows. Nothing that was deeply linked to you should be treated with carelessness. This principle applies to clothes, but also to words, decisions, and relationships. And if there is a central message here, it is this. Protecting your luck does not mean closing your heart, but opening your awareness. When you understand this, you start living with more presence, more balance, and more respect for your own trajectory. And it is exactly this posture that, according to Jewish tradition, maintains the flow of luck active throughout life. Now that you know these secrets of the Jewish tradition, the question is no longer whether this makes sense, but what you are going to do with this knowledge. Sometimes protecting one's own luck does not require big changes, just more awareness in the small gestures of everyday life. If something here touched you, reflect calmly and observe your life with different eyes starting today. And I want to hear from you. Write in the comments a phrase of protection or of attracting luck, something simple but charged with intention, because words also shape reality. If this content brought you clarity, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the little bell to continue receiving teachings that reveal what almost no one comments on, but which can silently change your path. Sometimes luck begins exactly at the moment you start paying attention.